There's a quiet pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't explode. It simply sits there, inside your chest, heavy, ignored, unchanging. And that pain has a name. It's the pain of not being heard, not misunderstood, not argued with, not rejected loudly, but unseen, unacknowledged, emotionally ignored. And if you're listening to this right now, there's a strong chance you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because when no one hears you, it doesn't just hurt your feelings. It hurts your sense of existence. You start asking yourself questions you never wanted to ask. Do I matter? Am I invisible? Is there something wrong with me? And the most dangerous question of all, why do I keep trying? The Stoics understood this pain deeply, even if they never used modern words for it. They lived in a world where silence, neglect, and emotional distance were common. And yet they left behind something powerful. Not false positivity, not empty motivation, but tools to survive the inner collapse that silence creates. And today we're going to talk about that. The silent wound no one talks about. When someone ignores your words, your brain doesn't register it as nothing. It registers it as loss. Neurologically, emotional neglect activates the same pain centers as physical pain. That's why it feels so deep, so confusing, so personal. You replay conversations in your mind. You wonder if you said too much, or too little, or the wrong thing. You start editing yourself before you even speak. And slowly, something dangerous happens. You stop expressing. You stop asking. You stop reaching. Not because you don't care, but because caring without being heard feels unbearable. This is why silence hurts more than rejection. Rejection gives you an answer. Silence leaves you trapped in uncertainty, and uncertainty eats the mind alive. Why you feel weak even though you're not. One of the most damaging lies people believe is this: if I were stronger, this wouldn't hurt. The Stoics would strongly disagree. Feeling pain from being ignored does not mean you are weak. It means you are human. Humans are wired for connection, for recognition, for being seen. The Stoics didn't deny this. What they warned against was something else. They warned against handing your inner peace to someone else's awareness. And that's the trap many people fall into. You begin to measure your worth by how others respond, by how fast they reply, by whether they acknowledge your emotions. And when they don't, your mind fills the silence with self-blame. The Stoic truth about being unheard. Here is a hard truth, but also a freeing one. The Stoics believe that most people are emotionally asleep. Not cruel, not evil, just unconscious. They react from habit, fear, distraction, and their own unresolved pain. So when someone doesn't hear you, it's often not because you lack value. It's because they lack capacity. Marcus Aurelius wrote that expecting emotional understanding from everyone is like expecting figs in winter. Not because figs are bad, but because the conditions are wrong. This changes everything. It shifts the pain from, what's wrong with me? To, what is this person capable of giving? And those are very different questions. Why trying harder makes it hurt more? Many people respond to not being heard by doing one thing. They try harder. They explain more. They give more context. They soften their tone. They over-justify their feelings. And paradoxically, this often increases the pain. Why? Because now your self-worth is invested in being understood, and every silence feels like rejection of your identity. The Stoics warned against this attachment. They taught that when your peace depends on external validation, you are living as a hostage. Not to the other person, but to your expectations. The invisible contract you never agreed to. Here's something no one tells you. When you speak from pain, you often create an invisible contract. I will open my heart, and you will hold it. But most people never sign that contract. And when they fail to honor it, you feel betrayed, even if they never promised anything. This doesn't mean your pain isn't real. It means your expectations were unguarded. Stoicism isn't about closing your heart. It's about protecting it with wisdom. the inner shift that changes everything, the Stoics practiced something radical. They focused not on being heard, but on being aligned with truth, aligned with integrity, aligned with their own values. They asked themselves, did I speak honestly? Did I act with dignity? Did I remain grounded regardless of the response? Because when you measure yourself this way, silence loses its power. It may still hurt, but it no longer defines you. And that distinction is everything. Why this pain feels so lonely? There is a special loneliness in being unheard. You're surrounded by people, yet feel completely alone. You start thinking, if I disappeared, would anyone notice? That thought is not weakness. It's a signal that your emotional needs are unmet. Stoicism doesn't deny this. It teaches you how to meet some of those needs within yourself, without becoming isolated or bitter. And that's where the real work begins. What the Stoics would tell you right now, they would not say, stop caring. They would say, care, but wisely. They would remind you that your value does not require witnesses. Your pain does not need permission. Your existence is not validated by attention. And most importantly, they would tell you that silence from others does not mean silence from life. You're still here, still breathing, still capable of meaning. And in the next part, we'll talk about how to rebuild your inner stability when the world stops listening, and how to stop bleeding internally from emotional neglect. When no one listens to you long enough, something inside begins to shrink. Not your intelligence, not your strength, but your willingness to exist out loud. You become quieter, not because you have nothing to say, but because experience taught you that speaking costs more than it gives. The Stoics understood this internal erosion. They knew that emotional neglect doesn't just hurt once. It reshapes how you relate to the world. And this is where healing must begin. Not outside, not by forcing others to listen, but inside, where your sense of worth was quietly wounded. The first Stoic shift: stop arguing with reality. One of the most painful habits people develop is this. They argue internally with what already happened. Why didn't they listen? Why didn't they care? Why was I ignored? The Stoics had a simple rule. Do not demand reality to be different. Not because reality is kind, but because resistance multiplies suffering. When you stop arguing with silence, it loses its sharpest edge. You don't approve of it. You don't like it. You simply acknowledge, this happened. And that acceptance, quiet, firm, grounded, is the first layer of peace. Why closure rarely comes from others. Many people believe healing requires one thing: being finally understood. But the Stoics knew something painful and freeing. Closure rarely comes from others. It comes from ending the inner negotiation. When you stop waiting for someone to realize what they failed to see, you reclaim your emotional energy. You stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen. You stop hoping for apologies that may never come. Not because you don't deserve them, but because your peace deserves priority. The power of self-witnessing. Here is a Stoic practice that quietly rebuilds dignity. It's called self-witnessing. When no one hears you, you hear yourself. When no one validates your pain, you acknowledge it internally. Instead of saying, no one cares, you say, I see what this did to me. This may sound small, but it is revolutionary, because it breaks the dependency loop. Your pain is no longer orphaned. It is held by you. Why being unheard creates shame? Unspoken pain often turns into shame. You begin to believe, if I mattered more, they would listen. The Stoics warned against this false conclusion. They believe that how others treat you reflects their inner state, not your worth. People ignore because they are distracted, because they are emotionally immature, because they are overwhelmed, because they never learned how to hold space. None of that is a verdict on you, but shame convinces you otherwise, and shame thrives in silence. The Stoic boundary you need to learn. Here is a difficult lesson, but a necessary one. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Stoicism teaches selective vulnerability. You do not close yourself off. You become discerning. You notice patterns, Who listens consistently? Who dismisses gently? Who avoids emotionally? And instead of explaining yourself endlessly, you adjust access. This is not punishment. It is self-respect. How to speak without bleeding. Many people speak from an open wound. They share hoping to be saved. The Stoics advise something different. Speak from scar tissue, not fresh injury. Meaning, process your pain internally first. Stabilize emotionally, then speak, not to be rescued, but to be expressed. This alone reduces the sting of not being heard. Because now your identity is not on the line, the inner reframe that restores power. Here is one of the most powerful Stoic reframes. Instead of asking, "Why don't they hear me?" ask, "Am I listening to myself?" Often, the pain of being unheard externally mirrors a deeper internal neglect. You ignore your own limits, your own exhaustion, your own needs. Stoicism invites you back inward. To live in alignment, not performance. Why silence can become a teacher. The Stoics believe that hardship reveals truth. Silence shows you who is emotionally available, who values depth, who only engages superficially. This knowledge hurts, but it also liberates. You stop seeking water from empty wells, and that alone saves enormous emotional energy. Rebuilding inner stability, one practice at a time. Here are simple Stoic anchors you can return to daily. Write what you wish you could say without sending it. Name your emotions without judging them. Practice gratitude for what is within your control. Limit emotional disclosure to safe people. Return attention to your actions, not reactions. These are not quick fixes. They are quiet reinforcements. And over time, they rebuild the inner structure silence tried to erode. What peace actually feels like. Peace is not the absence of pain. It is the absence of inner conflict. You may still feel sad sometimes, lonely at moments, tender in certain memories, but you no longer collapse inward. You remain standing, calm, rooted. This is Stoic strength. Not loud, not dramatic, but unshakable. If you're still hurting right now, let me say this clearly. Your pain makes sense. Your longing to be heard is not weakness. It is evidence of depth, and depth is rare. Do not let emotionally unavailable people convince you that your needs are too much. They are simply not equipped. A final Stoic reminder: you do not need to be understood by everyone to live with meaning. You do not need validation to be worthy, and you do not need noise to exist fully. Sometimes the most profound growth happens in the quiet places where you finally learn to stand with yourself. And when you do, being unheard no longer destroys you. It refines you.